So we're with Hugo Schally, who's the head of the Sustainable Production Products and Consumables, the environmental division within the EC. Hugo, your paper was very interesting this morning, but there was a kind of an elephant in the room, and that was the requirement for food down the road rather than bio-based plastics. Now, I think you said that by 2050, there'll be 9 billion people in the world, and I believe your colleague said 75% of resources are already allocated. So clearly, this sounds like a shortfall. Are you prioritizing food over bio-based feedstocks?
I think in the EU policy, it's clear that we want to make sure that for every use that we want to make of biomass, be it for energy or be it for bioplastics, it should not be in competition for food with food production.
Well, there was another discrepancy with the figures. I mean, this always comes up at this conference, how much arable land is allocated to bio-based materials. And obviously the bio-based industry says it's 0.02%. I think your colleague said it was nearer to 1%. It sounds like a contentious issue. And if there are going to be 9 billion people who need to be fed, do you think that pressure is going to increase?
I think we need to look at that in a systems perspective. We're not dealing with bioplastic in isolation. We're dealing with plastics in the overall society and with plastic in a move, the transition to a circular economy. So I think we need to look at the feedstock issue in that sense. Now, we are in a situation where plastic use and production is increasing exponentially, and there are no signs that this is abating. And that is a sign of product innovation and the different use of plastics. But I think we need to look very carefully on how we actually can minimize the use of virgin raw materials, maximize the use of secondary raw materials, and that therefore relieve pressure on the environment.
There is, of course, still sufficient plastic generated out of the oil barrel. I think plastic only represents something like 4%. Now, I mean, everybody knows that eventually the oil is going to run out, but in the immediate term, do we actually need a bio-based alternative?
When you look at the overall growth in plastics, and if we want to realize as environmental gains together with competitiveness and innovation push, you actually have to address the feedstock issue. Now, currently, the numbers are that 5% of fossil fuels are used for plastic production. If the trend continues, by 2030, it may be 20% of the fossil fuel that we take out of the ground. And I think, therefore, we have a resource issue that we need to address. Bioplastics can play a role, but we have to be very careful in how we want to use it and how do we actually solve the feedstock issue when we talk about renewable feedstocks for plastics.
No, I can see it's a very tricky balancing act. And I suppose timing is going to play a part in this. Rather than is there a need for a bio-based solution, maybe I should be asking you, is there a need right now for a bio-based solution?
The question is what you want to achieve. If your aspiration is to reduce the need for virgin raw materials, you actually can do that by a combination of increasing the recycling and reuse of plastics as such, together with an expansion of the renewables basis as feedstock. I think it's not one single solution. It's as always in circular economy, you need to play on a variety of solutions that you can use.
Okay. Now, oil-based plastics, I mean, it is recyclable. There is a much better understanding now that it's a valuable asset. It does go back into the economy. Unfortunately, it doesn't always go back as it came out. And I think somebody said today, I think it was the Tetra Pak lady, said they have a slight resistance to using recycled fibre in their cartons. Plastics is going back into the system, but it's not necessarily going back into the products it came out of. Do you think that's a problem?
I think it's a problem linked to the existence of collection and sorting facilities. Mm-hmm. It's an issue related to the information about the chemical characteristics of plastics. It's the issue about how and to what degree that information is passed through the system. And we're working on several solutions to actually help that along in the context of the European regulatory and policy framework.
So would the same, I mean, hypothetically, do you think they'd have the same resistance to a recycled bio alternative, like a bio-PET or a bio-PE, the so-called drop-ins that the bio-based industry promotes?
I think it's a fact that a bioplastic can be a very traditional plastic because it's a question of the feedstock being turned into a certain chemical product, plastic, at some point in time. And there, I think the resistance will be based on what are the chemical properties of a specific plastic product, whether it's based on fossil or bio-based at the origin.
Okay, I've just two other questions, if I might. What role do you see biodegradables playing in a circular economy?
From a principal perspective, biodegradability, or perhaps we should rather say compostability, is not in the first instance a circular concept, because it actually means that you diffuse the value of the product into the environment. It may at some point in time come back as soil enricher, whatever, but in the first instance you lose the material into the environment. So I think we need to look at very specific applications where this actually might make sense in the context of circular economy. I think we also need to be very careful with messaging and wording, talking about biodegradability or compostability and in what context. So I think there's no simple answer to your question.
Well, I think you're right on definition of terms. I mean, if I'm a journalist and I'm confused between the two, but consumers, I imagine, must struggle with this. But if the EU appears to be putting its weight behind the principles of a circular economy, that would tend to suppose that there's actually little room for biodegradables in that context.
I think there will be room for certain biodegradables if we analyze the impact over the whole life cycle. But I think we have to be fairly specifically looking at the specific applications.
Okay, fair enough. The last question, and just to go back to the use of resource to create a bio-based alternative, given that I think the food issue is going to, the magnitude of that is clearly going to grow, would the EU be more interested in supporting bio-based solutions that are not necessarily linked to harvesting a crop per se?
I think that's a question that is difficult to answer at this point in time. I think it goes back to what is the sustainability of the production and extraction of the biomass or the biomaterial that serves as the feedstock. I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
I think we'd like to thank you very much for your time. Can I just share one observation with you? And it's anecdotal, but we're hearing from people that have been attending this conference for some years that it's in danger of falling into a kind of worthy but not necessarily have a sense of direction. In other words, there's a lot of talk, but it's not really going forward. Now, why would you think that is? Is that lack of interest within the industry, or is that government not demonstrating sufficient will to push it along?
Well, I think that I wouldn't want to comment on this one because this is the first time I attend this conference. I would only say that the policy developments in the EU provide the industry with now perhaps a focal point on which to concentrate and say what are the messages we want to provide into the policy developments in the EU with regard to the plastic strategy. What are the messages we want to give for the development of standards for secondary raw materials, and what is the input we want to give to other developments such as improving the interface between chemicals, waste and product legislation.
So the door is open, it's up to industry to step through it.
I think the door is open and we're standing there welcoming them in because we want to hear what they have to say.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.